In 1957, the first satellite was launched into space to take its place amongst the stars. This signaled the birth of a new global consciousness, a dramatic change in our relationship to our planet. It gave us a place from which we could look at ourselves. From space, the beauty and the fragility of the Earth's atmosphere, our primordial support system, are striking. But so too is humanity's systematic plundering of every aspect of our ecosystem. From space, we can see the scars of pollution, deforestation, industry, and urban sprawl. Above us, as I speak, the 400 or so satellites currently in orbit witness and gauge the global impact of a human population that's leapt from 1.5 to 5.5 billion in this century alone. Coldly, they confirm the grim realities we all experience in our daily lives as we step out into the city. It is a shocking revelation, especially to me as an architect, that the world's environmental crisis is being driven by our cities. For the first time in history, half the world's population live in cities. In 1900, it was only 1/10. In 30 years, it may be as much as 3/4. The urban population of the world is increasing at a rate of 250,000 people per day. Think of it as a new London every month. The scale and the rate of increase of our consumption of resources and the pollution it inflicts is catastrophic.
In 1995, the architect Richard Rogers was invited to give the annual Reith Lecture, which, for those outside the UK, is a major public lecture series commissioned and broadcast by the BBC since 1948. His lectures addressed the topic of the sustainable city. And in kind of various ways, they're sort of rather fascinating little window into the very specific world of the mid-1990s. You're listening to About Buildings and Cities, by the way. I'm Luke Jones.
I'm George Kinjal.
I'm kind of conceiving this little episode, which is going to be very much a one-off and possibly slightly on the insubstantial side, as part of a larger meta project, which we occasionally return to, called The 1990s Was a Long Time Ago.
There's nothing as long ago as your youth.
But it really is a long time ago. It's fun. Lots of things are completely unchanged, and then lots of things seem completely unmoored in time. So this is very much like Rogers in his pomp. It's a kind of mature Rogers. This is in no way going to be like a systematic treatment of his work or of high tech, which is kind of on the long list of something that we want to get to at some point. It's really going to be about the lectures, and we'll talk about his buildings to the extent that he brings them into the story and the particular argument that he's making, often in quite interesting ways.
Yes, the way people think about themselves and what they do is not necessarily how other people think about them.
To summarize his thesis in these lectures, like right at the start, like what the point of because the lectures are like very strongly argued and they're very political. When people do these different Reith lectures, like they're given by all sorts of different people. There can be like a guy who's an expert in AI or whatever, or like someone who is a biologist, or like all of you have.
They're meant to be like seriously addressing some contemporary issue, quite high-minded,
yeah,
and by a real expert in their field rather than someone who's a writer or thinker, like someone, a doer,
a person of substance,
a public intellectual, but a person of action.
But so they're always a little bit political, but I would say these ones are particularly political. They have like a particular...
A lot of it is about policy. And it was a time when it was felt that there was a malaise that needed addressing in policy.
Yeah.
I think that was a genuine and general notion. Well, it's interesting. This was the first architect on a Reith lecture, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
Please fact checker.
Yeah.
A lot of it's political. Although I would say perhaps the political bits are less interesting.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that... So to summarize this kind of thesis, it's that the city hasn't had it all its own way in the 20th century. Lots of things have kind of gone wrong. But in the face of these kind of crises, which he identifies as social alienation and environmental degradation, basically, which are kind of still ones which I think people would say are the kind of pressing ones, a return to something like the dense, compact, walkable city, combined also with the very best of 20th century technology, creativity, all of the things which he's kind of excited by in those worlds. and blended together through brilliant design and creativity is the way to the best possible future for humanity.
It comes at an interesting time.
Yeah, in the history of the city.
In the history of the city.
Or
which
the history
is,
of the reputation of the city, certainly.
what you could call the modern city starts as an industrial city. The modern city, I think, is defined by powered transport, which allows it to grow large.
Yeah, the metropolis.
The metropolis. And it has a first phase of enormous expansion, growing slums, degradation,
Yeah.
environmental despoliation, immense density,
Yeah.
and expansion. And that goes on until perhaps around the First World War.
Yeah.
And then there is a period which is a period of the hollowing out of the centre, of sprawl, of suburbia,
Yeah.
of the kind of depopulation and degradation of the core, advantaging the periphery,
Yeah.
the enormous suburb. And that probably reaches its peak around 1990.
Yeah.
Or a little thereafter.
Yeah. It's hard to know exactly where do the lines cross or whatever.
And of course, they sort of, people are starting to gentrify parts of the abandoned core much earlier, perhaps in the 70s.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the core is probably still depopulating in aggregate. And then, since the beginning of the 90s, perhaps there has been a bit of a swing back, a restoration of the centre, and a slight decline in suburbia.
Yeah.
A relative decline in suburbia. And this perhaps comes a little after that inflection point, where the centres of cities are becoming a place where people recognise it's necessary to put lots of energy.
Yeah.
And we are having a number of the early sort of projects to restore the centres of significant cities, which he discusses.
So we're past like the age of escape from New York, aren't we? It's like it's increasingly not really going to make sense to imagine the city as a dystopia that you could just turn into a prison. But we're not quite either at the point of like runaway urban development and like incredible house price spikes. That kind of momentum is growing through the 90s, but people aren't going to really start noticing
in London.
it
They have more or less filled
noughties.
in by 1990 all the bomb sites, although some only fairly recently at that point. But they haven't filled in all the anything like all of the like inner city industrial abandoned buildings.
Yeah, all of that's going to happen. One of the big words in the way that cities were talked about in the 90s was like regeneration, which I guess people still talk about a little bit.
A beacon for regeneration.
Yeah, regeneration. You had to like the kind of obsession is with like turning slums, turning ghettos, as Richard calls them, into kind of happy and productive places again. It's something which sort of happens through all sorts of forms of kind of intervention, but generally by building really stonking great buildings that liven the place up.
Yeah, we're not quite into the full-fledged Bill Bauer effect, although you feel the ghost at the feast is already rather, what if we just built an enormous cultural centre?
So there's two books. So the Reith Lectures were turned into, quite literally, this book, Cities for a Small Planet. It's a pink book.
It is the most New Labour progressive colour.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so like Rogers is very bound up with the whole kind of like cool Britannia, Tony Blair, New Labour's coming in, we're going to sort out the problems of the country kind of feeling among the professional middle class. So yeah, I think what's interesting about the lectures is less the kind of headline thesis, which I think is now like so widely kind of adopted by people that it's kind of not very interesting to talk about.
Elements of it feel so familiar they are banal.
Yeah.
And they were also the orthodoxy that we were educated in.
Yeah.
And elements of it seem really wacky.
Well, yeah, what's more fun is the kind of incidental colour and the way in which the case is made. And I think we're probably going to dwell a bit more on that because it's more interesting to talk about. And also.
Yeah. I mean, if you want a note from later on to give you an idea of this.
Yeah.
Do you remember what buildings of the future are going to be like?
From lecture 5?
Yeah.
They're kind of like diaphanous, like media buildings. Which
they're diaphanous, moving, thinking robots.
Yes. More of that later, though. We need to go. We need to eat our vegetables before we're allowed to have pudding. I think one of the things which kind of dates the book, the lectures particularly, is the way in which he sort of identifies the dangers to the city, or the kind of the like, what is he against? What are his sort of enemies? And when he identifies sort of things which have gone wrong or problems which exist, he's also like, he's kind of identifying who the enemies of the city, or who the enemies of the sustainable city really are. Some of them, I think, are kind of like still there, and then some of them are very much like things that have happened in the 1980s.
I would say the core key enemy is the car suburb and the car suburbanization of the city centre. And by a car suburb, I mean this thing where you have... Were you taught in geography about different sorts of cities? And you have...
Different shapes? Or...
You've got a circle, which is rings, which is a classic. And then you have one which is like blotches, which has central business districts, which are all sort of placed randomly around in it.
Oh, yes.
And you drive around. And the car suburb is where you have SimCity-like regions, single functional regions.
Yeah.
Light industrial, retail, residential, connected by roads.
Yeah.
Meaning that there is no public space. You drive around it everywhere. Public spaces are divided by large roads.
Yeah.
Like, essentially, that's the first core malaise.
It is. And it's interesting, obviously, that was a kind of development paradigm in the UK, and it's something which had like a big effect on the redevelopment or the kind of structural like redevelopment of English cities. But actually, the kind of paragon, the worst example of this is Los Angeles. Like the true dystopia that he kind of holds up is always and I think that this is broadly like a kind of consistent thing for like English liberals, actually, is that like really dystopia takes place in the United States. So in this case, it is like Los Angeles, which is in its, I guess it is in its own kind of like 90s malaise moment, this kind of post Rodney King, like police brutality, alienation, crime. There's a certain set of dystopian examples, which nowadays would be completely different. They're like Los Angeles, Mexico City.
When we were young, there was a lot of talk about Mexico City.
Yeah, now people love it.
Yeah,
it's like a kind of lifestyle destination.
All the like axolotls in the canals.
Yeah, and all this great food. There's a whole apparently there was some article recently about how lots of Americans are gentrifying it now, and it's really
it's far past its best. You really had to be there in the 60s or whatever.
Yeah, it's a kind of interesting changing of the guard for those kind of things. Like dystopia does sort of move around.
Well, it's funny because he would put on the slides, for those of you listening, there is a 10 or 12 lane highway.
Yeah.
And he would juxtapose that with perhaps the cars going around one side of Trafalgar Square.
Yeah.
As they're sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
In a moment of extreme bathos.
Yeah, they're not really the same. Everything is on so much bigger scale. Here's a picture of Phoenix.
It strikes me that this actually, in a way, this whole text is kind of setting out a neo-Bannonism. I forgot what the book is called. Like, I love Las Vegas.
Oh, the Four Ecologies.
The Four Ecologies.
Yeah.
How do we like make one of these that's kind of fit for our new ecological age?
Yeah. I mean, there are the kind of examples of places that work, or the kind of the possibility of healing the city and making it better. So yeah, you've got all of the car and its malign effects. It's interesting that the example of like urban like hope or like renewal in the face of all of these challenges is actually unchanging. It's still Curitiba in Brazil, which I feel like I've been reading articles about for like decades about
it's
this.
Curitiba, Barcelona, and Glasgow.
I mean, Curitiba, yeah, people love it. They love the bus rapid transport and the parks and things like this.
Oh, is this the idea that instead of building tube lines, you should build big fancy bus stops? That you can kind of climb up to the first story of the bus and get in on the top deck.
Yeah, I think this is part. So I would say that this is one of the like quite sort of third way-ish dimensions of Rogers' vision is that, sure, there's like a idea of doing these progressive things of a sort of sympathetic, a state that invests in certain things, but the difference is that it's smart, and it knows about these smart, efficient technologies which aren't like the old forms of state
Very
intervention.
economist.
It's very economist. Like so bus rapid transport. The other one is CHP. They loves doing combined heat and power.
The next point is, I would say it's a world where we analyze cities kind of metabolically. Well, there is a second malaise.
Yeah.
The first malaise is the car suburb and its numerous invidious effects. And then the second category is the ecological catastrophe.
Yeah.
Which is to do with energy and pollution.
Yeah.
Already quite framed around global warming, but also air pollution and the solution to this is metabolic.
Yes.
It's
a kind
closed economy.
It's like metabolic awareness. Yeah. It's like there's nothing metabolic about the actual plan of action. The way that you intervene is by having these buildings which are a bit more sustainable and have all of these kind of creative. We'll kind of get into some examples later, but the city metabolism is a kind of form of analysis.
He believes that cities ideally should produce all their energy and recycle all their waste within the city.
Oh yeah, no, that's true. That's the ideal.
Right, let's carry on.
Yeah, let's carry on. There's pictures. There are these this is urban malaise. Here are some people selling crack in Philadelphia.
Dear city.
So malaises. There's the car. There's environmental degradation, and then there's a kind of policy malaise, which is development solely focused on profit or solely focused on maximizing return, like without any kind of higher mindedness.
Yeah. People are not public spirited.
Yeah, no sense of and there are all kinds of kind of indications of these, but the one which returns most often is the housing estate, which is a sort of specific English, well, kind of British term of art, which needs a bit of explanation for other people, but is basically like it's a sort of suburban house, like quite trad housing development.
It's full of single family homes with pitched roofs, but probably without chimneys, made of brick. They're 2 or 3 stories tall, and they are arranged semi-picturesquely, not all facing the same way, not really on proper streets, but on weird winding roads.
They're built by volume house builders.
Yes,
who are like quite specifically British. Like not sure that they're like these big national companies that have like 4 kinds of house that they build absolutely everywhere in these sort of same kind of developments.
They put enormous amounts of effort into. It's funny, they spend money on some things, like it is absolutely necessary that they be either red or possibly yellow brick, but ideally red brick, except in some parts where they have to be made of clad in reconstituted yellow stone.
Yes.
And the roof pitch is always the same. And they're really, it's real uncanny valley territory.
It's
when
strange.
You go
It's not really like, it's not like American suburbia because it's a bit denser. Like tiny gardens and houses really close together.
The houses probably occupy about the curtilage is probably about 40% of the total site area.
Yeah. But they're kind of positioned so you can get like driveway. You can normally have like a tiny gap so that the house is technically detached, which is thought to be an index of desirability.
Or semi-detached, quite often as well, if they're a bit more urban. One
of the funny moments in the lecture is, having kind of sketched all of that out, that there's a turn with a paragraph which begins, in 1991, the mayor of Shanghai asked me, and we then get this kind of story about designing a proposal for an enormous city quarter in Pudong in Shanghai. And the things which like Rogers and Partners, I think, did to try to propose something which was a bit different from this kind of car-focused paradigm.
Yeah, so he says Shanghai is rapidly being lost.
Yeah.
We're losing the beautiful riverfront of the Bund and, the courtyard houses
Yeah.
to meretricious trash. I'm going to propose an alternative,
Yeah.
walkable, mixed-use city for workers
Yeah.
for 600,000 people to work.
And-
What's that like?
Well,
It looks like a massive Tron ring burner.
yeah, it's kind of amazing. I think it's worth saying that the proposal, the kind of baseline proposal, is this sort of weird grid of skyscrapers,
Yeah.
like isolated skyscrapers, kind of
Very Chinese.
yeah, like very SimCity style. And what Rogers wants to do instead is this enormous sort of donut.
It's funny, isn't it? Because in this book, he calls out specifically how the negative influences of Ebenezer Howard.
Yeah, but this is
it. It's
This is
just
classic gardens.
extend vertically 20 times.
it's a very strange proposal. It's like an enormous Beaux-Arts circus in the middle, and then there is a donut-shaped ring of kind of closely packed sort of Tetris-style development. And I guess like this is a master plan, so it's meant to be kind of expressive of sort of potential rather than necessarily the kind of resolved form of the buildings.
Why is it
it's
a
funny
circle?
one.
I have a bugbear about circles. I think they're almost always a bad idea in architecture and urbanism.
Yeah,
There are exceptions, but like where the building is a circle
yeah.
or the city.
I don't think it's good in.
unit
I
is a
don't think it's
circle.
generally good in plan.
No,
It's quite annoying in plan, actually.
we are going to ignore the orientation of the sun, orientation towards practical objects in the city, and the fact that rooms are better when they're rectangular.
Yeah, it's very two-dimensional thinking.
He
Wait-
doesn't say why he does this.
Well, what he talks about is, I think it's kind of expressed by some of these diagrams that he has, but basically it's the idea that instead of it being a car-driven development, it would be based around these like nodal transport things where people would be able to get there by. It's sort of funny because obviously like Shanghai now has like probably like the world's largest metro and light rail system and like insane amounts of kind of public transport everywhere. But in the mid-90s, it was possible to think that, oh no, they're going to repeat the mistakes of Los Angeles. And
A thing he talks about is that a solution for the city is to have lots of little centers, which it seems at odds with some of his thinking. But the idea is that you have lots of little centers, and that the city is like really like you get a load of kind of Tuscan hill town type cities and put them all next to each other and have a fast train that goes between them.
well, I think that there's no.
So that you can do everything in your little community where you happen to bump into everybody, you socialize, work, live,
yeah,
educate your children.
like a neighborhood.
Yeah, but a neighborhood with workplaces,
Yeah,
a neighborhood complete with the commanding heights of the economy,
yeah,
a neighborhood for 150,000 people.
yeah, and powered by the communications technology of the future. But more of that in a second.
The information superhighway.
The information superhighway. Obviously, when he's giving the lectures, you can't see any of the projects, and you have to look them up on the RSHP site afterwards. And not all of them are on there. Some of them you have to find in other places. Some of them they've taken down because they obviously think they're not interesting enough anymore. It's very interesting how he uses them to make particular kinds of argument, and the types of, like, obviously he talks about them in a way that's very partial and which doesn't fully describe their architectural
Our
qualities.
transport engineers said that this is much better than anything else they've ever seen.
Well-
Our energy engineers said that this is wonderful.
Yeah.
It's good, yeah.
To be honest, I think this would be cool. I mean, if you look at what they've actually built there, it looks like SimCity. It's crap. But,
It is.
score one to Richard, I think, on that
It's
one.
cool, but
yeah.
it's kind of cool in the same way that this like new Saudi Arabian mirrored mega city is cool.
Oh, yeah, that is also, I'm afraid, cool. Yeah, so there's this other project he talks about, which is in Mallorca, which is like a much smaller scale, but it's still like a new town.
He talks about it as basically a garden city,
Yeah.
but it's a garden city that functions like an organism.
Yeah, it's all structured around like reuse of water. And the point that he makes with it is all about kind of designing a city around not being like heedless in the use of resources, and to kind of designing a city as this sort of thing which interacts to preserve, in this case, water, the scarce resource.
Yes, I really feel this one. It's a lot about the stuff I didn't like in Le Corbusier. You know, all these mod cons that are going to be installed. We're going to filter the water through these reed beds. We're going to everything's which in turn are going to nourish crops yielding biofuels for our CHP plants.
Yeah.
If he was slightly different at this time, he'd be talking about the city as a slime mold.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what it looks like.
That's a younger generation.
Yeah.
The slime mold guys. There's definitely an attraction to a particular kind of environmental design, which is one where the environmental kind of intervention is extremely visible and extremely structural, rather than one where it's kind of equally functional but invisible. Like, if you want to preserve the water, there's lots and lots of ways to do it, which don't involve it being on the centre in all of these very kind of clearly expressed, like, sectional divisions and things like that.
I guess one way in which I think it's new, one of the things I was reaching for with, like, neo-Bannonism is Bannon kind of says, okay... Bannum, Raynham Bannum, addresses the thing which is like, we want the power technologies to be heroic.
Yeah.
So we want to see them. And his solution is we live in a clear plastic bubble and they're the only thing on display.
Yeah.
And the next generation, the more mature one, is no, the shape of the building is part of the function. So it's for a reason.
Yeah.
Like you know, Le Corbusier's all the kind of modernist idea of a structural honesty.
Yeah. Yeah.
We make them in these kind of aesthetic forms because that's the most utilitarian thing to do, regardless of whether it is or it isn't. Which means we want sort of streamlined blobs. In the case of Richard Rogers, he's very interested in a facade which is kind of very deep and broken up, lots of layers. It will ideally aesthetically be probably a wide mesh, and then some pipes, and then some panels, and then a glass screen, and then a gap, and then a curtain wall, something like that. And so he uses that to kind of be, each of these is allowing me to channel the air in a particular way, or the water, or something.
Yeah, it's that idea of the kind of honesty of the building being it expressing what it's actually doing. And in sort of traditional, like, structural honesty, the building kind of expresses the structure which is actually holding it up in the kind of simple, like, version of it. And in this case, actually, he wants like a kind of services, an analog of that, where the building should express what it's doing with the airflow, with the water flow, with the kind of...
I wish I didn't forget the name. The Pompidou Centre is quite Banham-y, in that it literally is exposing the mechanical pudenda, as Banham said. Whereas the later schemes are kind of I've made this into a kind of bioform shape, which draws the air through. So it's a kind of more... This is expressing the use of energy to make the service building, the serviced space on the inside.
Yeah, so, I mean, in case anyone doesn't know the Pompidou Centre, it's like big glazed, completely open spaces on the inside with like enormous floors supported on these big steel trusses, and then all of the services are on the outside in this kind of space frame. All the services and all the circulation and everything like that. That's the sort of rhetoric of the design, and that's also sort of what is meant to kind of empower it to be this like totally flexible space for all kinds of different things. It's very interesting to me how
I can't really remember what problems for the city he was saying this was solving.
Oh, well, the way that he talks about this Pompidou Centre in the lectures is really interesting.
I mean, I know what problems he said it was solving at the time he was designing it.
Yeah.
But not in the context of these lectures.
Yeah, in the context of the lecture, he talks about it in a really funny way. So we're looking at a picture of it now, and you've got this like incredible, totally unique facade. And then at the bottom of the picture, you've got like this funny square with lots of people sitting in it. And what he talks about is the square. He says that like one of the best days of his career was when the mayor of Paris said that we could make this square in front of the building, and how wonderful that was to create this like new generous addition to the public realm. When he's talking about sustainable buildings, or the kind of the buildings of the sustainable city, there are these two like big themes. One is public, like buildings that contribute to the public realm, and one is buildings which are kind of environmentally sustainable. And the kind of I find it really funny to talk about the Pompidou Centre in that way. It like shows, obviously it shows like he's very good at selling, like you know,
always,
for all that he's very on the level about certain things, he absolutely knows how to sell, and he can make
the problems of the architectural practice only really started once Rogers himself stopped being able to, was sufficiently impaired that he can no longer really ring up mayors of cities and sell stuff, because he was just phenomenal.
I think he's incredibly convincing. But actually, like, there are all kinds of reasons why it's a good idea to have this square in front of the building, not the least of which is that the whole kind of presence and sort of rhetoric of the building is communicated by that facade. And if you had a bunch of buildings in front of it, the building like wouldn't be nearly as effective. There's this very famous competition drawing of it, which is just an elevation of that facade with all of the tubes going everywhere and all of these other elements which in the end didn't end up on it, which were these like big screens, and they were going to have like sort of digital writing and things going all over the place. The whole thing was like this incredibly like media facade, continuously animated.
It's really archigram.
Yeah. But you could...
Well, the competition proposal is more archigram than the built.
Yeah.
And in fact,
but
I don't find the internal spaces that memorable.
No, they're not. I mean, they aren't really memorable.
They're not even. They're not even that good.
No, they're not. They're not that good for anything, unfortunately. Yeah. But I mean, I kind of understand. I think it was a nice idea, and I think it's fine. But actually, it's good for spaces to have a bit of character and some limitations, I think.
Yeah.
But, I kind of love Richard, but there is something a tiny bit disingenuous about saying what was wonderful about creating this square was that it was going to give something to the public realm of the city. Actually, having the square there is a precondition for the building being a success. Like, you don't have a memorable image of the building if you don't have that square there.
Yeah, and how well does that square really work as an urban... Like, by the time...
Yeah, well, he credits
this lecture was given... This had been there for really decades.
Yeah.
Not very many. And you'd have to say that the way that square functions is it is a lobby for the Pompidou Centre, and it's not one of the great gathering spaces of even its immediate vicinity.
In the story, it's kind of like regenerated this previously benighted area of Paris, though. Yeah, it's just funny. I think it's like exemplary of the way that he can tell the story that he wants to tell by like drawing just the right bits from the various episodes of his career. So he talks about public realm, and he talks about like walkability and being able to go to the shops and the kind of excitement of having things close together, all this kind of stuff which I'm totally sympathetic to in the city. But then here's
the thing it made me think, which is that this is English landscape gardening urbanism, where he's sort of taken like the Jane Jacobs, like what we want is we want these little dynamic, differentiated neighborhoods with cute public spaces and little parks. And then, okay, that's the ideal nature that we're aspiring to. Yeah. And we're going to like make a synthetic, extremely manicured appearance of it
on an incredible scale.
Well, like the English landscape garden, right?
Yeah.
What the English landscape garden is to a meadow.
Yeah.
This is.
You want
a cute little park? We're gonna have a cute little park that's 400 meters wide and full of robots.
Yeah, it's gonna be. He talks about, I mean, definitely my favourite of the public realm examples is this unbuilt scheme for the Tokyo Conference Centre, which is like, I mean, it's genuinely a wonderful scheme. I absolutely love it. It's like these huge, big floating space. He talks about them as being like ships in dry dock, which I think is a good metaphor. They're these like pods of prodigious size housing these huge amphitheatres, which are suspended from these big kind of space frame bridges. And then underneath them, there's a sort of sculpted out area.
Are they like polished chrome on the
yeah.
outside?
They're shiny silver. And then sculpted out below
UFOs.
them is like a big area of, it's like a big mall, basically, like full of shops and all kinds of things going on.
But you know what's really funny? They kind of did do one a bit like that. The Edo Museum is this huge floating box.
Yeah.
Like 8 stories off the ground.
Mm.
The public space underneath it is rubbish.
This one looks very exciting, though. I would be. I think this would have been a lot of fun. As generally, like as the career went on, the buildings got more and more polite, and this is still very much in the favour
wacky
of like air traffic control towers on everything. You know, like
yeah, yeah, mirror glaze, a little tower. It's chromed steel with like flat semi-mirrored windows going around it, circular, just protruding out of anything.
Yeah.
And space frames.
Yeah.
They're not yet. Are they yet brightly coloured?
I think it's hard to know. Actually, I just don't know what the colours of these ones are meant to be, but they're these sort of, they're like container bridges with these like floating pods underneath and then these big dynamic towers. Oh, it would have been cool.
Well, I suspect it would have looked really cool.
Yeah.
But I don't think it would have worked as public space. I think the building would have looked really cool. It'd be really cool to visit and go around. But it would be...
I would love it. I would love to go to the like Uniqlo in the...
Yeah, but
like,
it would be actually
sub-basement
exactly
2.
like the out of town shopping centre in terms of its external... which he's complaining about.
Yeah, but it's in the middle of Tokyo, so it's, you know...
Yeah, it's going to be...
It's got lots of advantages.
For sure.
Yeah.
But it's like a really glorious thing.
Yeah.
Which is exemplifying almost the best qualities of the opposite of what he wants.
I guess so, but that's also, you know, that's the predicament of architecture, isn't it? Like you have to build within the actually existing development paradigm, which in Tokyo is, you know, people consolidating sites and wherever they can building something really, really big. And I mean, actually, it's kind of everywhere, isn't it? Like big schemes which you're going to get Richard Rogers to work on are going to be like a massive, great thing. And if what you're interested in is the potential of kind of street life and excitement, well, if you're going to say that just like axiomatically that's impossible to create within something with that kind of development paradigm,
I don't think it is. I'm not sure it is impossible. This definitely doesn't do it. It does something else completely different. This is still producing the products of heroic modernism.
Yeah. No. Well, I think we'll have to agree to disagree on this one.
You think that's...
This is good.
No, I said it was good. I agree. I think it is beautiful. I think it exemplifies all of the fantastic qualities of all the things he says he's against.
It's getting the thumbs up, yeah. The other thing which buildings need to do is this thing of being sustainable.
My cause for optimism in the face of grim evidence comes from the growing acceptance of ecological thought. Scientists, philosophers, economists, architects and artists, often working with local communities, are now using a global perspective to explore strategies to sustain our future. The United Nations report, Our Common Future, laid down the concept of sustainable development as the backbone of a global economic policy. Its aim is that we should meet our present needs without compromising future generations, and that we should positively direct our development in favor of the world's majority, the poor.
If we talk now about like, oh, a building is sustainable, we talk about like, you know, kind of whole life carbon analysis or something where it's like, how much energy does it use? How much embodied energy is sort of prospectively in the materials which are going to go into it? How do we kind of graph its energy consumption against like a reasonable projection of the carbon intensity of the electricity being used between now and its agreed like end of design life in 2072 or whenever that is? But like, which is not really what this is. This is much more about finding like a plausible non-mechanical ventilation strategy and like reduced energy consumption strategy, but in a way which is also like super expressive. And
in fact, what he says specifically as a general approach that people should take to designing buildings in a sustainable city is that you first should more or less ignore embodied energy because it's not that important.
What does he say about that?
He says the energy that goes into a building is much less. Making a building is much less than what it will use in its life. It's like a car.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that was probably the orthodoxy then. Yeah. That's kind of shifted a lot.
And then he says there are 3 equal consumptions of power you should minimize, which are light, heating and cooling. What's his other one?
Don't know.
He has 3 equal things, which are in no way equal in reality. They're like enormously off each other. And what you need to do is you need to design a shaped kind of mechanical property of the building, which eliminates the need for that thing.
Yeah. So that's the idea, that you kind of capture the heat of the sun in thermal mass and you ventilate the building through the stack effect, and you capture the rain on the roof and use it for some kind of cooling or recycling water or whatever.
Recycling water, which ideally then water like biofuel crops with grey water afterwards.
Yeah. Near where I used to live, they did a bit of like grey water treatment with plants in a local park, and it smells very smelly.
Well, yes.
So it has some disadvantages.
If you dump sewage in a park, it will smell. And then the aesthetic approach, and then the unsaid aesthetic approach, is that each of these things is like very embodied.
It's kind of expressed. Yeah. It is the identity of the building, and it's kind of legible. So it's like a metaphor of its true self.
Yeah,
is the kind of the sort of dream. And
the most extreme example is this Bordeaux Court.
Yeah, the Bordeaux Court, which is actually a built project where the courts, it's very cool looking. I've got no idea if they work or not.
No, we were discussing this before. They're funny. They're like big wooden pine cones sitting on tripods with aeroplane wing roofs which sort of go through them. And the idea is the aeroplane wing roof kind of pulls air in one way and moderates. And does
it also have like a cool base? It's got a pool as well, does it? Does it have like a cold basement? I don't think it has a labyrinth, but it has like some kind of idea of like the air getting cool here and being drawn up through the bottom. It's a very cool looking project. Yeah, it would be interesting if anyone has any insight into whether it actually works or not. That would be very
I guess in 2 ways, both as a courtroom and its energy strategy.
Yeah. This again, I think, is like a kind of possible future project, but like the history of what a green building is and what it kind of looks like, I think is kind of interestingly layered and contradictory within quite a short time. And this was definitely a moment where it was all about these kind of passive technologies and the form of the building, or the kind of articulation of the building, allowing it to harmonize with its environment. So like lots of thermal mass. You love like having some concrete that gets hot from the sun, or
thermal mass. In my limited experience of trying to design low energy buildings in the UK, thermal mass is almost always a bad thing. In reality, because you're neither getting really hot in the day for the night with solar gain, or getting really cold in the night to keep you cool in the day.
Yeah.
Actually, it's better to just have like a really insulated shell.
Yes.
And then service that.
Yeah.
And if you want to, you can put like a heat exchanger on.
Well, that is sort of the paradigm, actually. That's
Kind
probably
of
that's probably the contemporary paradigm.
Yeah.
But it's gone through a lot of changes.
Well,
this is
even at
still
this time, there were different people arguing. There's
Yeah.
always been like hair shirt. What we do is we just make everything tiny.
yeah.
We don't really heat and cool it. You just wear more clothes.
Yes.
There's always been people who say the solution is just every room should just be full of huge boxes of plant
Nice.
doing
Yeah.
something mysterious.
Having lights that go on and then off again.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Like heat exchangers in every room or whatever.
I feel like there's a particular kind of obsession with like
Back to nature as
solar
well.
approaches, or like
everything
monomania
out of
around
hemp wheat.
certain materials. Yeah. Anyway, that's all a sort of tangent.
Yeah. So those are the approaches to buildings.
Yeah, the one that he actually talks about in the lectures is this unbuilt scheme for the Nottingham Inland Revenue Building, which actually was built by Michael Hopkins. Yeah, quite weird looking building, I think, with its own sort of strange environmental strategy.
Yeah, which I think is sort of similar to the Portcullis House one.
Yeah,
Which is like we're going to make it into a like it looks like halfway between a castle and a strongbox with lots of chimneys coming out of it.
yeah,
The chimneys in that are the like stacking effect,
yeah.
but at the same time he's kind of playing with some
Does
strange iconography.
Does that work in Portcullis House, or does it just get very hot?
I don't know if this is true, but the thing they all said about Portcullis House is that all the shops that used to be on the ground floor
Yeah.
were the like crumple zone in case a truck bomb to protect the offices inside.
Yes, Tesco. There's a Tesco there. Yeah, I can imagine. It does look a bit like one. Yeah.
That's the sacrificial zone.
It's pretty. Yeah, it's quite claustrophobic in there. I can imagine being crushed to death. So lecture 4 is about London, which he's sort of been talking kind of towards the whole time, but he kind of he turns specifically towards the position of London in 1995, which is in the dying days of the long Conservative administration of 1979 to 1997.
The little political backdrop is London normally votes Labour.
Yeah.
And had a very powerful local government.
Yeah.
Which was Labour. And the county hall was opposite the Houses of Parliament.
Yeah. They did various forms
of trolling.
Yeah.
Red Cairn did lots of trolling,
Yeah.
which the Conservative government could see out of their windows. And that, along with various other things, meant they got rather cross. And they abolished basically all central local government and central local democracy for London. So that there was only the local boroughs.
Yeah.
Which in London are small.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then the rest of power was just the government deciding for London.
Yeah. Quite a lot had sort of happened as well, because started the redevelopment of the Docklands, so the building of Canary Wharf, and
There's rather nasty things about the DLR.
Well, what did he say?
He describes it as the theme park railway.
Yeah, it is a theme park railway. I mean, I guess
it's lovely and not impractical.
It is pretty impractical, but it's
It's because you hate light rail. You have a weird fetishistic hatred of light rail.
I don't hate light rail, but I think that rather like bus rapid transport, it's a kind of it's a sort of economist solution that actually has a lot of drawbacks which aren't acknowledged. Like, it goes very slowly and it's a bit annoying.
It's all right. I've lived on it on various occasions, so it's just fine.
So yeah, I mean, this is all against his kind of proposals for London are all against the backdrop of the kind of story of London in the 1980s, which is the abolition of the Greater London Council, and the Docklands, and then lots of development had started happening in East London, in the Docklands as well. Most of it quite bad, like a lot of very weird.
Yeah, very weird. The bit in between projects like the fun ones are things like Tobacco Docks, which was a big Victorian wharf.
Yeah.
And then they kind of spec built a weird Pomo shopping mall inside it, which gradually lost all its tenants until there was just a theme pub and a sandwich shop.
Yeah. Now it's they do conventions. Lots of it's actually quite a successful venue now. Lots of like tech conventions.
Well, it's a really cool building.
Yeah, no,
it was very strange because it was not it was not in the Docklands, and
Yeah.
it was not in the city. It was just between them in a
Yeah.
what was then a dead zone. Yeah, there is some really spectacularly appalling, very, very bad residential developments around there, and some quite fun ones as well.
Because the kind
but they're all
of the
ugly.
concept of the Docklands, of the Isle of Dogs, was that they wouldn't have any planning.
Yeah,
They was kind of taken away from.
pure Hayek.
I mean, the whole story of the Docklands is a whole nother thing, isn't it? Like it's like an homage to Houston or something, isn't it? They're like
I mean,
the Cesar Pelli Tower, and this kind of
yeah.
the kind of image of it is like really, really consciously like a dream of kind of 1980s America or something. It's like
Yeah, but it's got its monorail.
and it's little funny monorail. Yeah.
I mean, it's not actually a monorail, but it's like that. It's like little robot trains that go through the various of the big heroic capitalist buildings.
Yeah.
Now, the Isle of Dogs is actually quite a place to visit. It's really weird collection of towers in which are all in water. So often it's, the tower rises out of the middle of a pond.
But I mean, they went completely bankrupt, but they did make a success of it in the end.
They did, but they were, as he mentions, bailed out by, they put in a much better transport link from central London.
Yeah.
Which is the Jubilee Line extension.
Yes, which had to be paid for by the government.
The London that welcomed my Italian parents and many others in the early 1930s was a democratic haven from the persecution of European fascism. But the humanism of this great city went far beyond political tolerance. London was the first city to create a complex civic administration which could coordinate modern urban services from public transport to housing, clean water to education. If Britain was renowned for its parliament, then London's county council was acknowledged as the most progressive metropolitan government in the world. If London was the first modern European capital with an elected government authority, it is now the only capital without one. Elsewhere in Europe, city authorities have embarked on ambitious programs of urban regeneration, investing in state-of-the-art public transport, new cultural institutions, and encouraging the development of mixed-activity neighborhoods. In fact, across Europe, there's an emphasis on renewing urban culture. By contrast, London is being transformed by policies designed to empower the market rather than its citizens. Londoners have no direct say in their city's affairs, no foil to counter the search for profit in their city. The redevelopment of the huge Isle of Dogs, certainly one of Europe's largest urban projects, was carried out without statutory planning or public debate. Londoners are losing faith in their city.
Well, his whole thing about London is it all becomes quite political because obviously he's making the point that it's sort of absurd that a city doesn't have a government and doesn't have like a way to do planning. And lots of things which would kind of come out of this, like, the Greater London Authority was restored under the next government and Ken Livingstone came back again. And there was this big thing called the London Plan, which is like a big sort of planning, kind of overarching planning document talking about London and sort of setting out the way in which it's going to be developed, which I think was like hugely influential and broadly has kind of transformed the city for better or worse. Like this thing where you can go to like Tottenham Hale and it will be full of skyscrapers. It's with like terrible student housing in them or whatever, is a product of the London Plan, really. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a success, but I'm saying it has an enormous effect.
It has, but in the context of that, the thing that we were talking about earlier, where the population troughed. I think London. I'm remembering this years ago, and I may get it wrong. I think the population of London reached its lowest point in '92, and it's put on nearly 3 million people since then.
Yeah.
So there's been a huge increase in people, value, land value, and economy. Yeah. And that's meant that there's been a lot of development.
Yeah. So, I mean, he makes the argument, which I think is sort of still a valid one, that it's a bit peculiar that we don't have that our planning isn't more kind of planny, that it doesn't...
Well, London was in an extreme case where there wasn't any planning.
Yeah.
Policy, really.
But even so, it's still the case that although local councils or like identify sites where certain like areas where certain kinds of development will be favoured. It's still up to developers to kind of come up with the plan of what it's going to be like.
There are mainly restrictions on what you're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
Which is mostly, in my experience, almost anything.
Well, but that's for little people though.
Yeah.
That's not for the big guys. And then the other like part of the London lecture is all about the public realm again and kind of public spaces. And there's a lot of dreaming about what London could be like if they made lots of the kind of public spaces a bit less crap. And one of the big ones is Trafalgar Square, which he has a good photo of in the book, which at that time was a kind of big traffic roundabout, and he talks about how
full of lots of pigeons.
Yeah, well, they've got rid of some of the pigeons, haven't they?
There was because you used to buy little packs of grain from stalls that would, which were subsequently banned and cleared off.
Yeah. And this did actually. So there's a sketch of something in the book, but it did actually become a Millennium project carried out by Norman Foster, where they pedestrianised that area in front of the National Gallery and generally tarted things up a bit. It's now always there are always pavement artists, and there's always quite aggressive drunk guys.
Yeah, we were like it was a bonus, wasn't it? Hawksmoor bonus.
Yeah,
where we got. Oh no, it was the Ian Nairn bonus. Drunk people shouting at us.
I nearly had a fight with someone there. I was sitting there minding my own business. He came and started.
Yeah. Also, they've mucked up the way into the National. There's this tendency where people are like, we've got a big grand old museum. It's got a really obvious way in, and then the whole internal structure is designed in this Beaux-Art way.
Yeah,
around
that entrance.
Let's put a door on the other side.
How about we make that like a weird space that you barely walk through, and instead
you can't get up.
Yeah.
It's not the only museum in London they've done that to.
No, people. Yeah, that's what they like.
Obstinately trying to turn it upside down.
In that context, actually not in this lecture, but a different one. He does also talk about his scheme for the National Gallery extension, which was this project which ended up in a very convoluted way, eventually being done by Venturi Scott Brown. But again, it's very funny the way he talks about this project in the lecture, because the thing about it that he talks about is that it creates a staircase and a new route to Leicester Square.
Which, in fact, the current building does.
It also does, yeah. Which is like, that's what's happening in that little gap in the middle of the elevation.
Yes.
But he doesn't talk about what the rest of the building is like, which is this like, I mean, it would have been great to build this. It's really crazy. I'm not sure I really like the way that it interfaces with the existing building, because it doesn't look like there's any... I can't understand how you circulate between one and the other. But
like a lot of his proposals, this one looks cool in drawings. It also looks really dumb. It doesn't look like it... like
it's like big... Again, it's like big aircraft, like air traffic control tower, like really high. And then there's something which is a bit like Yale Art Gallery flying in the air or something on pillars.
Yeah,
and then these
various
big
bits of the Lloyd's building. Yeah,
big sort of a bit of a motif are these kind of cylindrical rooms with sort of shutters which are a bit suggestive of like when you're watching the test of the atom bomb and they kind of like fold down.
Yeah,
or whatever.
A little bit like Thunderbirds.
Yeah, it's
Tracy
very.
Island.
This one's very. It's very. The model actually is very Thunderbirds, but
it's got the shiny helical staircase.
Yeah,
it's like one little bit of the Pompidou internal, the unsatisfactory bit of the Pompidou bit, surrounded by weird nonsensical observation towers. The thing that is obviously problematic about this is that it's a terrible extension to the National Gallery.
It does.
It doesn't work as an extension.
I can't understand the way that it kind of joins together. But in a way, I don't really care about that. It's more just that
it looks like it joins together by a 2-story staircase, which appears to be at like 60 degrees.
There's something funny going on, which I have not completely understood in the elevation. And then there's lots of people who sort of look like they're staging a prison riot on top of the
on top
air,
of the,
air traffic
the
control
weird
tower.
little. Yeah, I mean the other thing is like a radio mast.
Yeah.
It looks like that tower has the slight appearance of something that's designed to survive a nuclear attack.
Good, practical. It's the 1980s, yes.
Yeah, Ava Larcher.
And this this like motif, these like very sort of articulated towers, it does appear in other places as well. There's this like kind of dreamland scheme for, I think this is the Hungerford Crossing, which is sort of between the north and the south bank of the Thames, just a bit further down from Waterloo, where they've got all of these sort of funny. I don't even really know what would be going on these, but they're these like different towers standing in the Thames with all of these bridges going between them. It all kind of looks like it's like high-tech floating shanty. It's very
strange, isn't it? Because his proposals. So at one level, they are what we should do is like encourage good public policy through changes to the tax system and zoning control, while optimizing.
That's so third way, isn't it?
While
It's
optimizing
like,
these things. And then the next thing is we should design more efficient, energy efficient buildings. And then there's a third rail thing, which is like, and also everything should be like weird pillars, and between them, people should float around in pedal powered gyrocopters.
Yeah. That's it.
Everything should have little windmills on top, and kind of Dinotopia version.
Yeah. Which is the one I like. I like Rogers's London. It's very wacky, and there's quite a lot of all that kind of thing. There's this very unconvincing scheme, which I feel like I've seen in different places, to put like a big wiggly roof over all of the South Bank and that kind of thing, which he also talks about.
This was interesting. So he says the thing that we need to do to make London more like a European fun city, cafe city, is we need to make it slightly warmer.
Yes.
And the way we're going to make the public space slightly warmer is by covering it with an enormous plastic roof.
Yeah. It turns out the other way is just not to address the crisis of carbon emissions.
Yeah, it's been quite a summer.
It's been absolutely baking. So the final lecture is this one called, what is it called? It's like about future architecture, basically. And it's
what we
kind of
what we need to do.
Yeah.
The like 10 and 50-year plan.
Yeah, and it's this one, I've found this very attractive because it's where he kind of he's been very restrained, and he's really tried to kind of communicate with an audience which I think he presumes to be quite conservative.
And fairly stupid.
And in this one, in the last lecture, he does like dream a bit, and he kind of lets his hair down.
Well, but he does both things. This is the lecture also where he's like, we must address marginal rates of land taxation to encourage that, you've got to, where you're putting in new infrastructure, you've got to have a minor infrastructure levy on transport-dependent land use.
This is incredibly like third way, isn't it? The thing of like, we're not going to do tax.
Like, they're not necessarily bad. I'm not saying they're bad policies. I just don't think it's really like relevant to what he's talking
But the
about.
mania of like sin taxes for vice, subsidies for virtue, is like, that's an extremely 90s like liberal.
I mean, it's still essentially what The Economist says is the solution to almost anything.
Yeah.
Now, and sometimes I think they're probably right, but I don't think an architect is going to be the person. I'm not sure I could tell you. And I don't think he could tell you either. And I don't think it is really...
Well, he has lots of things he wants to talk about. He talks about how, we need more design and how European cities are doing it better.
And schools should teach biology, history, geography, mathematics, engineering, art, and appreciation through the understanding of architecture and cities.
Urbanism, yes, absolutely.
That's how everything should be taught. There should be a cities class.
There should be a cities class, yeah.
That's what he says.
But he does also, he does lay his hair down a bit. There's a bit where he talks about the vacuum tunnel transport system. Do you remember that bit? Hyperloop, yeah. He talks about Hyperloop. He talks about, in the book, he's got this like Kevin Kelly quote, which is very...
Who is Kevin Kelly?
He was the editor of Wired magazine.
Oh, okay.
And he's like absolutely like he's the kind of like cultural figure of the
MTV generation.
not yeah a bit, but like particularly like first tech bubble, global
Okay,
village kind of information superhighway kind of
Pets.com.
age. Yeah, it's interesting. That's what he's plugging into. I mean, he has a picture of a microchip actually on the.
Yeah, it's
in
funny
the
because
book.
it looks from here a bit like a
Rogers facade.
Rogers facade. Yeah,
Nice. I think that's probably
the idea.
yeah. It's a funny mix of like super tech optimism, like policy proposals, and then the other element is that he's also super about participation. He has like he has a lot of rhetoric about how we need to get people involved, we need to get citizens involved, and this kind of planning is going to be he kind of imagines as like simultaneously like bold, visionary, and also like highly consultative and like
lots of people. So Jane Jacobs had exactly the same thing, which is where they believe that if you just give the power to the people, they will do exactly what you want.
Yeah.
So he believes that if you give the power to the people, they will want they won't want little brick houses with little gardens.
Yeah.
They will want moving, diaphanous thinking robots,
yes,
which you can walk on top of and walk underneath and perhaps walk on top of you.
Buildings are going. That's also buildings are going to dematerialize.
And well, let's unpack what he means by buildings dematerializing, because I think that has several. His vision of the future of the city has several different components, and I think. Well, I could say a couple of what I think they are.
Yeah.
So the first thing is literally this interest in the dematerialized facade. So the facade, instead of being like a surface, one side's on the inside, one side's on the outside, you have, like in the Pompidou Center, like a whole series of things which are sort of in the in-between space.
Yeah.
And the whole kind of body of the building is this in-between space, and then within that there's a kind of served space. Within that there's the bubble.
Yeah.
And that is a depth. Another way in which they're dematerialized is instead of being like you have a flat plane and you have objects within it, which are the buildings, big box retail shops on a motorway, they actually become a landscape, which was very much another thing people were thinking of in the time. They go under, they become the ground, they become the sky, the road, the street is something that goes through them, become infrastructure, they cease to exist. They don't have walls. You could imagine like the bus stop sort of is part of the building, as is the street lighting, as is the road, a different part. And the building is kind of continuous, like set of technological interventions without edges, like you're living in a giant microchip.
I think also at various times he's been kind of very like plug-in adjacent, or like an enthusiast for, the building is going to be reconfigurable and you can change things. And that was obviously when the kind of the original intention with buildings like Lloyd's was that they were flexible in the sense that you could change the bits and you could kind of,
it's like this metabolic notion that like you this thing can be infinitely extended, the components can be, it's like a computer, you can pull out the components and put in new ones, upgrade,
and he still
bolt on.
Fundamentally he still believes in that.
Yes.
And that when he thinks about the future, he still thinks that that's going to happen.
Occurred to any of the buildings ever?
No.
Only thing I can think of is that there is the kind of heritage restoration attempts at the capsule.
The capsule hotel,
not hotel, the apartments, where they've tried desperately to kind of think of some way of reconditioning these pods that were only meant to last for 20 years.
Yeah.
By installing like heritage reel-to-reel tape recorders in them and things
it's never really worked that way. No, I don't think anyone has ever made that particular form of like.
Because a lot of buildings have been built in this way where, okay, it's like this, and the idea is you could build more of them on, and they just like bolt on. You could just like build one. Here's the design. You just plug them in, plug in the pipes, ban them again.
Yeah, but it doesn't. No one has done that.
No, it's never actually happened. And it's here we see how he's a fairly old man. You can tell from his clipped accent, although he would have quite a lot of career ahead of him still at this point. He's still fundamentally really radical, but he's also a professional and a terrific salesman who is able to accommodate himself to the new world.
As structures become lighter, buildings become more permeable, and there's no reason why pedestrians should not walk through rather than around them. The street and the park may be part of the building, or the building might hover above or below them. The architect, Cedric Price, once said that the main problem with cities is that buildings get in the way. In the future, this will no longer be quite so true. We can finally expect a similar revolution in transport. The car is an outdated piece of polluting technology, which is out of step with the needs of the modern city. If its costs reflected the social and ecological damage it caused, it would rapidly be replaced by a new generation of clean, quiet vehicles. The technology for this already exists. High-speed train links allowing fast, comfortable movement from city centre to city centre are also set to reinforce the importance of cities as hubs of communication and contact. The newest generation of trains already travel at nearly 200 miles per hour, but magnet levitation trains, which are now being tested, will double that speed. In the not-too-distant future, a vacuum tunnel transport system traveling at 1,000 miles per hour will make trains compete with planes on long-haul destinations. We will soon travel underground from London to New York or Moscow.
I sort of, at the time of thinking of his dematerialized future city, I also think about junk space. Junk space is dematerialized architecture in a way.
Yeah, well, it's become kind of virtual reality, which is actually inconveniently still built. But
I mean, that's a bit one bit of the, where everything is just like, the building is kind of continuous, but at the joints, it's just made of mastic.
Yeah.
Bad pipes.
Yeah.
Unthought, acoustic ceiling tiles. It also sounds a bit like, the city as an endless airport.
Yeah, I guess that would be
with
one.
Ramps and...
Yeah, although we're kind of expanding something which is quite a small thing in the lecture. It's hard to know
For
exactly
sure,
what the...
But I think there's lots of clues to it along the way.
Yeah.
Well, what do you...
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think that he's kind of returning to the like dreams of his earlier projects. I mean, I think that he at that point seems to think that the coming era of technology in the 90s, the information superhighway, the communications technology, is in a way going to like vindicate a lot of ideas which are kind of unfulfilled kind of dreams that he'd had as a younger architect. And one of the things he talks about is how we're not going to have these like enormous companies in the future anymore. The future's going to be made up of much sort of smaller, more regional companies, and more things are going to be kind of like more localized, but they'll be connected through technology.
He kind of wants everything to exist as an ideal version of like Italian city-states as well.
Yeah,
which is something he brings up a few times.
He does,
like only in passing, but
yeah, no, the idea of the Renaissance or the idea of like Florence, the kind of idealized Italian city or urban experience. It's definitely there.
He was Italian.
Yeah, well,
I mean, of Italian extraction.
Yes.
It's not quite what happened, is it?
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, we could go back to what are the things which sort of date it? I think the things which sort of date it are, first of all, for me, this sort of anxiety that, like, the city could go one way or the other. Like, this could still be the end of the city. Actually, we know that, like, London is about to go is like actually already way into like an incredible boom, which is going to add millions and millions of people and like prodigious quantities of development and like so much money. Everything's going to be so expensive. All the like people are going to be like the idea that
It's
like,
also in a kind of cultural efflorescence at this time. I mean,
yeah,
like this is the era of like Orbital and the young British artists. And,
yeah. There's a lot of that. But like, you know,
it's really cool.
In the Green Book, it's a bit like, oh, it would be great if we could get like young, upwardly mobile people to move to this bit of Holloway, which seems like
which had kind of already
like,
it was already happening.
I know.
I mean, it was still quite crap.
Yeah.
The areas that like this area was still where we are right now, poor.
Somewhat, yeah.
This was fairly impoverished.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, although I think that like,
are we part of the problem, Luke?
Well, the gentrification of actually like the gentrification of this area was largely carried out by my parents' generation, and actually specifically by my parents and lots of people they knew. They were literally living like around here, as Rogers had been doing in. I mean, like Chelsea wasn't always that posh. Like
not all of it, anyway.
You know, the place that he like his big lovely house in Chelsea, which he moved into in the 60s or whatever, like that was the same process happening there. I guess that in the 90s you couldn't have foreseen that you're like, oh yeah, that'll be happening in Wanstead or Leytonstone or Streatham or, you know.
Yeah, I would say the gentrification fringe hit Streatham at about 2012.
Yeah. That kind of
Streatham, for people who don't know London, is not very central.
It's a long way away. Like all these places are a very long way away. I mean, actually, arguably,
for the first time in the last year, the population of London since 1992 has declined. Are we in a new work from home post-COVID? Are we entering a new super cycle of cities?
I don't know. Is the answer.
I suspect not, but
I don't know. But I
don't know.
I do think that it's likely to be a point of inflection, but I don't quite know where the trend is going to go, or what the kind of distribution of it is going to be.
What is the new Reith lecture for today?
What is the which architect would you pick?
And what would they be saying?
Yeah,
because we've sort of criticised him, but also he was so much. This was, I'm not sure we've really done justice to like the context and things, but this was so much of its time.
This was definitely it must rank as one of the most successful Reith lectures ever. Like very few of them are made straight into a book. Like this book sold a lot of copies as well. You know, you can pick them up for absolutely nothing.
It's now very cheap. Yeah,
you can pick them up for nothing. But they were like, it had, and I think it had a huge impact. You know, he was kind of brought into the government as this expert. So they did write a big report. I think that his, the things which he said, whether it's necessarily all coming just from him or also from other people, really did shape the kind of London plan and the way in which London was like redeveloped, the kind of development sort of model for and planning model for London from the like late 90s on.
I have no idea who you propose to do the city of the work from home generation.
Yeah, that's a job opening.
Masayoshi Son.
Poor Masa, yeah.
Do
you think? He was big in WeWork. I think that's not really the same. Did you see about WeWork, Adam Neumann's new...
He's going to WeWork the house.
He's going to WeWork the house, yeah.
I think the end is just saying, like, what is the future? And that's a question I hope over the next, shall we say, 10 years of this podcast.
Yeah, maybe we will
try and
come up with something. Yes. Thanks for listening.
This was a bit of a palate cleanse. We'll try and do something.
We'll do something else.
A bit more heavyweight.
It's been ages since we've done like a one and done single episode, so that was kind of the intention, which has been fulfilled.
We have both books and architects kind of on the immediate short-term list.
Stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
Remember, you can get bonus episodes if you sign up for our Patreon, and you can also find links to nice images and all this kind of thing on social media. All of our links are on our website, aboutbuildingsandscities.org. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, especially to all our patrons. Thank you for your patience.
Yes.
As you can see,
There've been a few things going on, but mostly
few things going on.
building related.
Yeah. SBR is very sticky. It's one of the things I learned today.
SBR.
It's like some styro something copolymer.
Ah.
Butyl. I don't know. It just says SBR on the bottom.
Right. Yes.
We used 10 litres.
10 litres.
No? 25 litres today.
Yeah. We've both been building.
Not in the same place, but quite close.
Yeah. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.